Great. We're currently live in YouTube. It's 2 p.m. And I would like to welcome all participants to the first session of the SDG Learning Center. We now will launch and go ahead with the session. Thank you all for joining.
Okay. Thank you so much. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, depending on where across the globe you are joining us for today's session. I'm delighted to have you share with us, all 62 of us already online. This is session 4 of the 2022 edition of the Sustainable Development Goals Learning, Training, and Practice series, a series of capacity building and knowledge learning sessions held as a special event to the high-level political forum, which is in process. Ladies and gentlemen, this session is being hosted by the International Council for Adult Education, ICAI, the World Bank, UNDP Namibia, in partnership with the Office of the Prime Minister, the Statistics Division, UNDESA, on behalf of the Global Network of Institutions for Statistical Training, GIST. Our theme today is Learning Disrupted, Reimagining Learning Ecosystems. And by way of introduction, learning and development continues to evolve, taking on board new developments in technology and addressing emerging needs. The manner in which learning technology is, the manner in which learning and development interventions are framed, issues of funding and relevance, as well as digital transformation, I believe, and many of you will agree, that they are presenting some sectors, some challenges to the sector, that is the learning and development sector globally. In light of the acceleration of the digitalization arising from the COVID-19 pandemic, this session today will share some lessons on how the learning community has been addressing increased remote engagement, as well as the need to rethink education and learning, taking into account various issues, including levels of development of governments and other partners. And so as we think about some key objectives, what we have identified is a number of questions that we will hope to interrogate today. Among them are, how might we think through the barriers the education, learning, and development ecosystems now face? And what activities might we undertake to overcome those limitations on a global scale? We also want to interrogate what are the lessons learned for education from the pandemic, and what are the takeaways, if you will, for new strategies and approaches to learning. What are the limitations and limits, the risks to digital technologies in education? And we could go on with that for a long time. But then we also ask ourselves the question, how can we make global training materials more accessible to various adult learners? How can coordination among training providers be improved to increase efficiency in training materials that are being developed? And how can we improve national adult learning and training programs while reducing dependency on international and regional partners? So these are some questions that we hope to interrogate today. And in order to help us to do that, we have 4 timely initiatives which will come together in this session, presenting global perspectives in learning, as well as some more specific country and thematic perspectives. So we will start off with the International Council for Adult Education, highlighting the role of education and learning and development in the role of digitalization, with the particular question or theme that she has given to her topic. This will be followed by a presentation by the World Bank, which will discuss several opportunities and challenges the world is facing today that makes upskilling key, and then discuss some key shifts and 21st century learning approaches that platforms to improve the scale, the quality, the equity, and effectiveness of learning. We'll then proceed with a presentation of a learning experiment featuring partnerships between the UNDP Accelerator Lab, Namibia, and the Office of the Prime Minister. And our last speaker will present the work of the Global Network of Institutions for Statistical Training to improve coordination and access to training materials and statistics, as well as the efforts to increase sustainability and training. Ladies and gentlemen, we will have all our presenters going first and making their presentations for 12 to 15 minutes. And at the end of all the presentations, we will have a period of question and answer during which we invite your robust participation. And to enable you to do that, we therefore ask you to, throughout the presentations, put your questions in the chat. Please ensure that you engage and put your questions in the chat. And so we want to jump right into our first presenter so that we will have maximum time for discussion. And so I want to invite Dr. Katarina Popovic from the International Council for Adult Education to speak on digitalization of education, panacea or anathema. Katarina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Charmaine. Thank you for this rich introduction to the topic. And I really do hope that I will start exploring the topic that is occupying each of us. I saw that we have people from around the globe, and I hope that they're all interested in the ideas that I will share, and of course, some of the questions that I will ask, and my colleagues will continue exploring them. So I'm sharing my presentation, and of course the usual question is, can you see it? Can you hear me well? I hope it works well. So of course the intriguing question is, so is digitalization of education something good, very good? Is it a magical solution, or is it anathema, something we should be afraid of? So I will bring a few arguments for, well, different theses. First, let me start by saying that one of the most important reactions, one of the most important answers of education sector during the COVID-19 was exactly digitalization and moving to the online. That was great because it helped to bridge the gap caused by this severe disruption, the most severe in the recorded history, as UNESCO is naming it. It did help very much to support continuation of learning, and I'm sure you have heard the phrases learning should never stop. Thanks to the digitalization, online, Zooms, and other platforms, it was possible. It did also help to move to to continue education and learning through the non-formal education and learning. So when formal education was stopped, it helped, and also in the future, there is a great potential for it to help to reach those groups that are hard to reach, those groups that are excluded for, well, geographical, social, or economical reasons. Digitalization had also great potential to increase participation and inclusion. There are some lessons learned already, so thanks to these 2 years. So we were collecting experience, reflecting. As adult educator, I have also to say what I find really precious is that gives quite a lot of autonomy to individual learners. So autonomy, freedom to decide about the learning process, learning goals, the dynamics of learning. And for us, for the societies, it's very important that it democratizes the access to information. So it enables almost everyone to have access to different sources of information. Well, of course, there are things that have to be considered in this process, and I will list only a few of them for the period. First, there is a lot of discussion about the digital gap. We know that half of the world is not online, and that's really a serious issue. And of course, the problem is it's not only about give them a computer and an application and a Wi-Fi connection. We hear quite a lot that there is discussion about right to connectivity, even a tendency to replace right to education by right to connectivity. So that's not enough. This is only the precondition. This is only the infrastructure, and we need much more. And of course, digitalization of education is not something that will save cost, although there is a tendency to believe, oh, it's much cheaper, you just need a connection in the computer. And of course, we know you need very good infrastructure, very good Wi-Fi connection, and of course, very good programs. And here, just to remind you of one of the typical difficulties and programs that we have faced during this Zoom time. I'm sure you remember the famous case, Judge, I'm Not a Cat. And of course, each of the session, can you hear me? Are you online? Oh, we lost the speaker and so on. So just an illustration of many technical difficulties, which means digitalization is not a cheap solution. If those who believe so, they will be disappointed. So there is a need for serious investment to make it really a quality resource. And of course, there is the issue of privacy, of data protection, of security in internet, especially among those groups who are not so much used and skilled in this field, and those who are vulnerable in different ways. And of course, we are aware of the danger, of the risk that technology could be also very much used to control the people, especially in authoritarian countries where there are some groups or regimes or governments who tend to use it for these purposes. So parallel with the digitalization, there should be also kind of civic education that will help people to control this process, to take part in this. What are the questions that remain very serious also in advanced digitalization? I would say for us as educators, and I would say especially for adult educators, the question is still learner-centered education, learner-centered teaching. Is it still valid? I believe so. We, for many, many years, we were fighting for this approach that learners' needs have to be considered, learners' experience, learners' wishes, learners' individual approach to learners is something that should be provided. And of course, how can we do with a, well, very typical situation that we are also in now? So this is something that we should be really serious think about. But also, what about embodied learning? So online and digital learning is pretty much excluding embodied learning, which plays a very important role. But also, or even more, social emotional learning. This is still very crucial, and we know for many types of education and learning, social emotional aspect is extremely important. So how can we address this through the digital education and digitalization of education? And of course, last but not least, the role of the teacher is still very important. There is no research that did not prove, dealing with this issue, that did not prove that the role of a teacher is very important for both children education and adult education. So teacher is a role model, as a guide, as a facilitator, as a source of information, and so on. So a few more questions. For example, I would say that this is the question not only for education, but for the modern post-COVID time, if you can talk about post-COVID time. Well, the biggest problem we face as a world, as a civilization, are not technological, but ethical and pedagogical. So how can those ethical pedagogical problems be solved with the help of digitalization? And reducing education to just skills, skills and competencies, this is the common language today, and we talk very much about it. But if you reduce the whole education to acquisition of skills and competencies, we can also leave the space for learning different kind of things that are based on values that might not be something that we want. For example, learning about pseudosciences, conspiracy theories, fake news, alternative facts, learning hate and hate speech, closed-mindedness, and so on. This is just, of course, one of the illustration. But if there is only the digital and online way of learning, and we do not deal with the issue of the content, then we also open the space for this type of learning, if you can call it learning. But people do acquire also information from this part, from these sources. So I would say values and the content, what are we learning and teaching, and the goal, what for? These are still very valid questions. And this is something that we should not forget in the process of digitalization. So what are the things, what are the fields, the areas where digitalization might help? I would be suspicious and hesitant about solutions like this. If it's about poverty, it's about lack of a social justice. It is about global inequalities, like the case of youth in Rio de Janeiro favelas. I'm not sure that blockchain is, for example, this is one of the solutions that is offered, that this is something that will really help to change their situation. Or take this one. This is from the International Literacy Day 2018 in Paris, UNESCO, and the company promoting literacy teaching using application. And they are promising that they will close the literacy skills gap in 3 minutes. Well, anyone who was dealing with the literacy, even just for a short time, knows that that's not possible. So that's an example of this seeing digitalization and magical solution, and seeing digital skills as the way to solve all educational problems. Well, then there is, of course, artificial intelligence and other types. This is something that could be explored. Again, I would be hesitant to promote it as a silver bullet for all educational problems. But for example, using different teaching assistants, we are all using WhatsApp. I don't know any person who is not having it. So why not using it for learning purposes with the help of, I wouldn't say artificial intelligence, but digital assistant, or different, chat bots and different type of digital support to learning. Now I will just, in this last part, I would go to the question of, is digitalization something that will help us to achieve the SDG goal? And now I'm reminding of Transforming the Education Summit announced for the September in New York. There was already a pre-summit, and what was asked for and what the countries and participants signed to is not to reform the education, but to transform it. How can we transform it? Well, probably not by using the same kind of the problems that we used to create, the same type of thinking that we used to create the problem. So transformation really needs a deep rethinking. So what does it mean for digitalization? Well, it means we should really clearly check where and how can we apply this. And here are a few examples where I would suggest to be cautious with digitalization. One of the examples is adult literacy. Why is that? Literacy is much more than skill. It's not skill of reading or skills of reading and writing. It's about, I would quote here, of course, Paulo Freire, it's about reading the world. It's about learning about the complexity, about the power relationship, and you need empowerment. And I don't think any digital tool can compensate a bit empowerment that you can get through the human touch in literacy courses. Those people are usually shy, they lack self-confidence, self-esteem. They really need this kind of a human touch in order to be empowered. So of course, combination with the digitalization is possible, but this is something really an area where I would say, be cautious about that. Next field is climate education or environmental education, or we can call it also education for sustainable development. Of course, we know that it's good to recycle, and we can have digital courses on that and teach people about why is it important. But what is really needed is action. We don't have time, and the planet does not have time. We heard it many times already. So we need much more than awareness about the importance of some actions. We need really to increase the agency of a people. We need to make them move. Then another field where I really think that we need more of a traditional teaching, maybe combined with digital. That's the whole field of intercultural, anti-racist, human rights education. What I'm showing here are the examples of art-based education. I deeply believe that art has a great potential in changing mindset of the people and really bringing the true transformation. These are the examples from Augusto Boal Theater of the Oppressed, which proved to be a really powerful way to work in the field of anti-racist, intercultural education, open-mindedness, human rights education, and so on. Another field is peace education. And we see, well, the situation in the world is unfortunately proving that our efforts until now were not enough. So in peace education, we need much more than transferring information and teaching people why peace is good and war is bad. This is by far not enough. It's not about skills acquisition. It's about emotions, emotional attitude, And it's again about action and agency. We want people to act towards freedom. And that's why skills acquisition is not enough. We need to change the mindset of a people. We need to support critical reflection. And that's not easy to do, to be done through the digital means. And it's about transformation or transformative learning. Here I would call Jack Mazirov and the theory transformative learning. You need a kind of disorienting dilemma. Sometimes you need to confuse people. You need to take them out of the comfort zone in order to show them all the aspects of the war and armed conflicts that they might tend to overlook or to ignore. And this taking out of the comfort zone, the challenging pre-assumptions that people might have, this is really one of the most complex tasks of education. So what we have at the end, what we have at the end are two possible scenarios. We have been talking, and Chairman made the introduction, and reimagining the future of education. Well, there is one almost dystopical scenario where robots and artificial intelligence are taking over and people don't have any role anymore. And well, teachers, traditional education, we are all sitting in our computers and there are boxes and teach and learn only online. The other scenario is we have learned a lot from COVID-19 crisis and the world is a paradise. We live in harmony with the people and with the nature and so on. Well, I would say both of them are quite extreme, of course, but that's the task for us to say, how can we contribute? What is the contribution of digital education, digital skills, and what should traditional education do and change in order to find the best, the most realistic solution? And finally, I would say, well, that's how I ended the presentation yesterday. I need to repeat it. So education doesn't need, after the COVID-19, a kind of technological patch. It's not like we had education and it was nice, and then COVID-19 happened, we have a wound, and there is digitalization, digital skills that is a kind of a patch or a digital glue. Not at all. We need to rethink deeper. We need to rethink the global structural inequalities, the global problems. We really need a new approach. And in that context, the digitalization could be a true partner. And I believe the colleagues that will speak now will give more examples of how it could be done in the best way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katerina. Thank you for giving us quite a bit to think about. And I want to encourage the participants. You would have heard quite a bit coming from Katerina. We have some cautions, we have some challenges, and we have some suggestions. And so there is much to consider as we get ready for the question and answers. At this time, I'd like to invite Sheila. And Sheila, I'm pronouncing your name as an English person, so I hope I'm saying it right. Jagannathan from the World Bank to make her presentation. Over to you, Sheila.
Thank you, Charmaine. You pronounced it very well. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Very clearly. Go ahead.
Very good. And wonderful foundational presentation, Katerina. So as you said, I will now start to talk about the nitty-gritties and some of the practical aspects. So first off, thank you for inviting me to speak. This comes at a very opportune moment as there are many key drivers of change shaping the world of work, hybrid work, and skilling and learning in general. We need a reset, as Katerina said. And so my presentation, brief one, will present on the big shifts in the future of work and learning and how that is shaping learning in the 21st century. And I'll talk a little bit about the World Bank interest in learning and capacity building and some of our approaches, and finally end with some lessons for navigating these changes. I'd like to start with a brief quote by none other than Einstein, who said, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be the one who cannot read and write. It will be the one who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And that's what we are here talking about, learning and unlearning. I'd like to start with briefly discussing why there is a global imperative for massive skilling upskilling, and unlearning, and all of that for individuals, institutions, as well as the critical role of capacity building in the world today. So there's several key drivers, the most important one being the fourth industrial revolution, which is disrupting the future of work on a global scale. And as you know, McKinsey estimates that 45% of the jobs we know today will be lost to disruptive technologies in the next 10 to 20 years, but these will be largely the low skills, low income jobs that are routine. And then so almost the entire workforce globally needs to be ready to upskill when required by career disruptions that will now be accompanied by many new emerging job opportunities. Nextly, achieving the SDGs by 2030 is a global commitment by all. And these require investing massively in human capital through continuous learning opportunities for all, ranging from top policymakers to ordinary citizens, from elected representatives to service delivery providers, from civil society to the general public and youth. So that's a huge challenge. Three, or think of it as an opportunity as well. Third, developing countries, emerging countries are experiencing a youth bulge. For example, India needs to find jobs for about 12 million youth entering the workforce every year. These people are confronted with far fewer job opportunities than their predecessors, and unless there's an ecosystem available to continuously upskill and reskill these folks, they'll not be job ready. How can the government promote skill development for preparing youths to take advantage of jobs that don't even exist today? In fact, I was at a panel at Harvard just 2 months ago where we were talking about how do we prepare youth for jobs that don't exist today. So that's an opportunity and a major driver for skilling. And finally, climate change. The challenge of climate change, which is already impending lifestyles and livelihoods in many parts of the world. Extreme weather events that used to come once in 500 years, such as prolonged drought and storm surges and snowstorms and hurricanes, now occur with disturbing frequency. Regularly across the globe and in unexpected ways. So learning how to substitute renewable clean energy for fossil fuels, or how to build community resistance to climate-induced weather events, require behavioral change that affect lives and impact livelihood. So what I'm trying to say with these drivers is that skilling and upskilling is becoming a global priority for citizens all over the world. Changing behavior, changing attitudes, beliefs requires awareness raising, structured learning, knowledge sharing, just-in-time application, and capacity building. I also wanted to mention that at the same time, there is also an unprecedented change happening in the world around us. Technology is everywhere. There is a tsunami of data. AI, cognitive computing, and robotics are disrupting work. And we have 5 generations in the workforce, working all together. And we need to know how to work with 5 generations. So there is a fundamental disruption in the way we teach, learn, credentialize, and access and support. Could you give me one moment? One of my slides has disappeared. Okay. Just a minute. Okay, something is happening, but I'm just going to go on and later share the slide. I had a slide here on showing the various disruptions on learning, but I will explain it and not waste a lot of time talking about it. Trying to put it back in. So the big shifts we're talking about is, first off, learning is moving from one phase in one's life to being continuous and life-led. So what does this mean? That Chris Deedy from Harvard wrote a chapter called the 60-year curriculum. So people are living longer and people are working longer. And we already established that we need to be learning in and out. The shelf life of skills is 4.5 years. So we need to constantly reskill and upskill. And in order to do that, we need continuous learning. So what Didi talks about is our curriculum is literally 60 years, where it's not 12 years of K through 12 education, another year of bachelor's, and maybe 2 more years of master's. What we need to do is, after our initial education, we need to continuously come in and out of learning. And academic institutions are working towards making these longer curriculum available. The next second is, learning is not just formal as it used to be and structured, but now learning is viewed more holistically. It could be formal, it could be informal. You learn on the job, you learn through micro learning, bite-sized learning, you learn through social interaction and peer learning. So the idea of looking at learning in a more holistic way is going to be important as we move forward. And formal learning will actually take a lesser and lesser role, although in the early stages, formal will be sort of bigger role than the other forms of learning, but it all has to be blended. We also move pedagogically from a lecture-based mode to multi-channel, experiential, and flipped classroom. So I think as adults learn, we need to provide more opportunities for them to apply and practice and experience and learn from others. And so it's no longer about talking heads and PowerPoints, but it's really providing opportunity for people to practice in a real life environment and learn from others. The role of the teacher, next, the role of the teacher and the learner change. In this context, the teacher is no longer, as you know, the sage on the stage, but somebody on the side, guiding, coaching, mentoring, and facilitating active learning that we talked about, answering the questions, helping them use digital tools, but really making the learner self-sufficient and empowered. And the role of the learner is also changing, moving from more an individualized person to collaborative as they learn with peers and experts and are supported by tools. And basically what we're doing, or the facilitator or the teacher is doing as well, is facilitating collective intelligence through crowdsourcing and so on and so forth. The fifth point is also, we're moving away from learning in silos to cross-sectoral learning, because today everything is linked to everything else, with digital transformation taking place in all sectors. Jobs are becoming hybrid and require a mix of skills. So, for example, today you need marketing folks who know how to do visualization and understand data. You need urban planners who know about climate models, as well as urban planning and spatial models and so on. And those are the jobs that are going to be in demand, and those are the jobs that are going to pay better. So moving away from learning silos to more cross-sectoral learning. And the final point in the differences and the shift is also moving away from modular education to micro-credentials. So since we have this need to continuously refresh skills, this calls for more simpler, unbundled modular approaches. Earlier, we used to have these long degrees. Now you have micromasters for 1 or 2 years. You have specializations, you have learning pathways. So it's like Lego blocks. You put together your own Lego blocks by mixing and matching from a variety of curriculum. And now you can even pick and choose from a variety of universities to increase your career prospects in your current job, to move to a new job, to become certified. So smaller, compact programs to reskill fast in the time of need, but also smaller, compact degree. And so micro-credentials can take the form of certificates, badges, MOOCs, etc. So these are some of the shifts. And I want to now switch to, so we are focusing on embodying these shifts in our educational projects, but also in our own platform. So just to refresh you, most of you are aware of this, but poverty is a huge challenge. The World Bank is governed by twin goals. One, ending extreme poverty by 2030, reducing it. And of course, COVID has had its challenges in achieving this. And the second goal is promoting shared prosperity, which is really fostering income growth for the bottom 40% of the population in every country. So this vision calls for learning, innovation, and collaboration as critical accelerators to achieve these two goals. Now, during COVID, of course, we had a number of priorities: saving lives, strengthening health systems, saving jobs and businesses, and building a more resilient recovery. So these were our priorities. We were designing capacity building that accompanied financial commitments made on the above COVID responses, on economic recovery, on healthcare, on sanitation, infrastructure, and so on. So what I wanted to refresh you again is embodying many of the principles and shifts in learning. We had launched an open learning campus earlier, but we're updating this to embody the shifts I talked about, which really has 3 schools for the external World Bank clients and partners: a bite-sized learning school that is more about visualization and a sort of TED-like talks, storytelling, multimedia apps, and so on. Then we have the academy, which goes into more structured learning. And then we have the WB Connect, which is more around sharing innovation and crowdsourcing and learning from peers, and et cetera. Just for our staff only, we have another school called On the Job Learning. And so all of this is to bring about the continuous learning aspect. I know I have only a few minutes. This slide talks about many of the product lines that we have. And Sharmeen, are you saying I'm out of time? Sorry?
2 minutes remaining.
Okay,
2 minutes.
got it. So these are the product lines. I won't say very much, but what we're trying to do more of is to have the on-the-job practical aspects to learning in the flow of work, so that people are not disrupted to come out for learning, then go back to work, and then come back to learning. And we're also experimenting with AI and adaptive learning to personalize the learning for the individual, and finally exploring with virtual reality to bring about more immersive learning. I want to end with the fact that the World Bank's Open Learning Campus and our capacity building efforts are all about partnership, because it's not just about learning, it's about changing the world for the better. And this can only be achieved through strong and relevant partners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. And again, I remind the participants as they think through their questions or comments that Sheila reminded us about some of the key shifts that we should take into consideration, both economic and environmental, and how that must be taken into consideration as we think about the future and how we move forward. So I encourage you to have your questions. Now I'd like to invite Tekla Jarman to go ahead and share with us the experience of the Accelerator Lab.
Thank you so much, Shemaine, and allow me to thank you for granting me this opportunity to share with you the Learning Disrupted experience that we had with the Acceleration Lab Namibia. The presentation on Learning Disrupted is a case study on the collaborative learning of the Office of the Prime Minister and the UNDP Acceleration Lab Namibia. The partnership between the UNDP Acceleration Lab and the Office of the Prime Minister had a distinct goal, and this was to enhance ethics, integrity, and the accountability of the Namibian public service. The Office of the Prime Minister had the need to enhance the role of the already nominated 42 integrity committees. The committee members range from 6 to 10 members per institution, and this is across the Namibian public service. We had the need to ensure that the role of the integrity committees were responsive, inclusive, participatory, and included representation decision-making at all levels. In addition, the office wanted to explore different ways of doing business as usual in the public service. We had a lot of committees in the public service. That's, for example, the Customer Service Charter Committee. We have wellness committees, business process reengineering, and a lot of other committees. So there was a definite need to reinvent and look at it from a different perspective. Our partners, the Acceleration Lab, wanted to introduce a portfolio approach and systems thinking to the public service. They wanted to introduce experiments and solutions while at the same time developing at scale. I will just delve into the portfolio of 5 different components. The strategic, in deciding on a specific project, we recognized that the legal framework were in place and that we could build on that, incorporating innovation. And I think Sheila has mentioned a lot of what in a presentation to what happened in our case. This had the biggest impact to what would happen to the future of the project. The tactical one, which was a bit less or a lot less, we already had an understanding of the public service. So not only from our side, but also from the side of the Acceleration Lab, we had quite a good understanding of the public service, and not only that, but also its drivers. And we could build on our expertise and insights while being pragmatic at the same time. The identity, we really had to build on an identity as the members from the integrity committees are multidisciplinary, and we wanted to establish a culture of ownership in these committee members. The activities, we built it on concepts such as experimenting and testing in the field of good governance, where this is quite unconventional. And we had to start with small experiments that can have big impacts. And we included it in self-reflection in the form of the very first sense-making session that we started the project with, which was a face-to-face session. The partnership came at the ideal time when, due to the pandemic, resources were scarce, but partnering helped us to refocus, and we ended up having a much bigger impact. Partnering up with the colleagues from the Acceleration Lab. Talking about systems approach that we followed, again, this is so much in line with what Katarina and Sheila has shared. We were introduced to sense-making, collective intelligence, and then the generalization that all aspects can be interrelated and the independent to form the complete picture at the end of the day. And this enabled us to identify points where there were an energy or an appetite to learn more. Our activities included learning labs, face-to-face learning labs, where we introduced the UNITAR toolkits, and then also some digital practices that we did on the declaration of interest form for public servants that they are completing to declare any private interest, any remunerative work outside employment that they might perform. And we looked at behavioral insights with online tests as well as some collaboration tools. The resources, we made use of both the partners' joint and in-house capacity and also other available resources. So it didn't really just come from from one of the partners. It came from both. The integrity teams, or the I-teams, as we refer to the teams, characterize the importance of integration and working across functional areas that can include members from internal audit, human resources, procurement, or even strategic management. In fact, the integrity committees are chaired by members from the strategic management level. Learning about the systems, the Office of the Prime Minister made using existing enabling legislation and policies to create interventions fit for purpose. The sense making was important to understand the dynamic and really to prioritize the activities. For the public service, over 3 months, we developed and 300 integrity committee members across the Namibian public service using the UNITAR. On the community, the effects and impacts of looking at improvements, ethical, effective, and efficient public service delivery over time. So this will really take some time, and it is not an out solution. It's really good governance that will take some time. The impacts situation that we could create through this was using the UNDP Acceleration Lab engagement facility resulted in shared cost and a higher impact. So because we could share the cost and also the resources, we were training up to 80 participants at a time. And this was really unconventional. Even for myself, it was something different because we are used to training 20 to 30 people. The face-to-face training. The skills transfer and the use of digital collaboration tools popularized. This is where we introduced tools like Mentimeter, QR coding, etc., to the integrity committee members. Our initiative was centered around a user-friendly approach, making sure that the integrity committees take ownership of this and that it is indeed easy for them to use. What would success look like, especially from our point as the Office of the Prime Minister? We want in terms of reference that these integrity committee members could work to, and then also have developed the work plans. We have active online and offline participation and timely report submission. This was really a problem for us, especially in the beginning when we started with our Zoom meetings. We are having bi-weekly Zoom meetings with the integrity committee members. And in the beginning, it didn't work that well. We started off with 5-6 participants in that Zoom meeting. The last meeting that we had last week, Wednesday, the participation was 60 for that Zoom meetings. During those Zoom meetings, we are sharing new developments in integrity. We have recently introduced Ask the Experts. So we call in different experts from Namibia to come and showcase what they have on ethics and integrity to the integrity committee members. And then we want rapid experimentation and iteration. our takeaways from this one, I hope I have done justice to our takeaways, because we have really opened up a complete different world for these integrity members. This was a complete different way of learning, experimenting, testing, and collaboration. But just to mention the partnership plan, we are partnering and building relationship whenever possible. So this is something new, and we have really started to introduce this to invest in the approach. This was one of the most difficult components for me, to just trust the process and see where it would take us. A collaborative culture, different perspectives to ensure success. And we really had this culture that could contribute to not only finalizing some of our rules and regulations around the committees or the terms of reference, but also to set up a guideline for the integrity committees. Work out loud. This was something very new to the public service. Remember that as public servants, sometimes we are a bit cautious of oversharing, especially on aspects around ethics and integrity. So yeah, we have introduced sharing through various social media networks, and it is really contributing extensively to really improving the service delivery by our integrity committee members. Measuring progress, we have now learning time frames. This is also something new that we picked up from the acceleration lab, that we use 90-day learning cycle. So over a period of 90 days, we can establish that a project that we have set up a work plan for should be fully completed. And with that, I would like to submit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tekla. And may I not minimize your presentation, but I just wanted to highlight something that just stood out to me. I absolutely love work out loud. It really is just, I like that term, so I'll be using it. I like it. And it speaks deeply from a government perspective, I believe. So thank you so much for sharing. And now I'd like to invite Mitali Sen, the chair, Global Network of Institutions for Statistical Training, to share their experience. Mitali?
Hi, 1 second. Let me share my screen. Please let me know, because I had to change computers as that previous one was not working. So let me know when you see my presentation.
We're seeing it, yes. Okay.
Yes, yes. Okay, success. Good afternoon, Chair, colleagues, partners. This is such an amazing session to be part of, and I'm really happy to be here. Great presentations that really highlight where the future is headed, what are the challenges we are facing, and how the pandemic made us also focus on these things. We have all been struggling in different ways through the pandemic, most especially in trying to build capacity through training for the Sustainable Development Goals indicators. So my name is Mitali Sen, and I work for the International Program Center of the US Census Bureau. And the mission of my unit is actually to build the statistical capacity of national statistics offices in low and middle income countries. And currently, I'm going to make this presentation as the chair of the Global Network of Institutions for Statistical Training. And this is a response that GIST made to the pandemic. As all of you have said, that learning was disrupted. It's not only the learners that were affected, it's also the teachers, the pedagogical skills. How do you work in low and middle income countries with digital technology, etc. So my presentation will be covering a few of those things. So hang on, why doesn't this worry? So the presentation is I'm going to cover what is this global network of institutions for statistical training, GIST as we call it. What has been the response to the learning being disrupted? What have the lessons, what lessons learned? And then where do we see as statistical capacity building, where do we see the future and what can GIST do about training for the Sustainable Development Goals? So originally, the UN got together this network, it's called this GIST network, in response to the 2030 agenda. Because when the 2030 agenda was put in place with the SDG data demands, many national statistical offices basically felt very challenged to be able to produce these indicators on a regular basis. And so it was seen that training is really key. And the kind of training that most of these countries were getting, while there was a supply, it was like ad hoc often. There were big gaps in knowledge because not all kinds of courses were offered. There was duplication of effort. Sometimes the incentive for training was not appropriate. Access to training was often difficult. So there were many organizations producing and providing training, but there was no systematic approach to building staff skills in statistics. And so the Global Network of Institutions for Statistical Training, which is a network of international and regional training institutions, we are working together to build sustainable statistical capacities through efficient, effective, and a harmonized delivery of training. So the GIST structure and organization, just to give you a sense of who we are, the Secretariat of GIST is the UN Statistics Division. The GIST members belong to 3 types of organizations. First is international agencies, including like the Food and Agricultural Organization, the IMF, the World Bank, the International Labour Organization, UNITAR, Paris 21. So a lot of players in the international field that are working on building statistical capacity on various fields of the SDG indicators. The second type of organization are the regional agencies and training institutes. So there are African Development Bank, then UNCAP that works out of Japan, Eurostat, and then ESTEC and NCA that work out of East and West Africa regional training, then Arab Training Institute in ATRIS in Jordan. So we have a bunch of organizations that are regional training institutes. And finally, we have some country national statistics office that provide training to others, including where I come from, the UN Census Bureau. So there's Brazil, China, India, Norway, Republic of Korea. They have their own training centers. And so they are also part of the GIST. And then we have an stakeholder advisory group. And these are actually 12 country NSOs currently from all over the globe that advise us on what are their needs and whether we are addressing their needs as GIST. So the GIST response to the pandemic disruption, well, I'm going to speak about 4 things briefly. One is the UN SDG Learn Statistics Hub, the micro learnings also that are available, the Statistical Literacy Inventory that we produced, and a task team has been working on how do you establish sustainable statistical training programs in country. So UN SDG Learn is here are some courses. This is just a screenshot of UN SDG Learn. And it's a platform with courses on many statistical topics relevant to the 2030 agenda and SDG indicators. So right from, say, in Brazil, there's an institute called IBGE that has fundamental principles of official statistics. So some general statistical courses to very specialized SDG indicator 5.1a, self-paced learning put together by Food and Agricultural Organization. And if you go to SDG Learn, you will see there are lots of courses that would build your capacity to be able to produce indicators. So now, right now, we have built over 70 courses and 30 other learning resources. In addition to full courses, we also on UN SDG Learn have micro-learning. So there are little videos that are really fun to watch and yet educational. They are brief, they're small, so we can learn in small time. You know, we don't have to spend a whole lot of time. So here are some courses on why is statistics important? Is the statistics right? And then how do you steward data concierge, and then have a data visualization contest to see how can we represent data best. Other micro-learnings that are there on UN SDG Learn are, so not only do we have videos, but we also have technical notes, we have documents that are important for building the capacity of statisticians to deliver the SDGs. So this is a page of the micro-learning platform. Now moving on to statistical literacy. You know, these countries are producing a lot of statistics, but unless the population is statistically literate, unless the media reports on good statistics, it's not being used to the extent. So data use is important. So we have now compiled on a website an inventory of courses that teach what statistics is all about. So currently the statistical literacy initiatives that are listed are by the following organizations. You have UNITAR, that is Institute for Training and Research, UN Statistics Division, US Census Bureau, Local Action for Applied Statistics Portugal, International Literacy, Statistical Literacy Project. So this is what the website looks like. You can search by title, you can search by organization, what topics you want to figure out. So this is a course on understanding data and statistics better. And it'll tell you who this course is for. It's generally for civil society, for media, etc. And then finally, the fourth thing that we have been working on is actually working with countries on trying to understand what it takes to have statistical training programs be sustainable. So we wrote some reports based on interviews with various countries. And some of the key suggestions that came off that research was we need a repository of good quality training materials and tools. We need some kind of standard curriculum for statistics that countries that are trying to build statistical training can say, this is what we need at a minimum. We need some recommendations for what makes statistical training sustainable, and how do we regional and international partners work best with national statistics organizations. You know, often NSO training seems to be supply driven instead of demand driven. And I think we need to turn it around where the NSOs figure out what they need, and then they approach international partners and say, this is exactly what we need. And so we can fill the gaps. We also did training. We are also working on training related to the entire national statistical systems coordination. So All the line ministries produce statistics in many countries, and we need to know how to coordinate so that there's no duplication of effort between the different line ministries. So what are the kind of standard and core trainings, and how do we bring them together as a system when we train together? And then finally, assisting Ghana and Ethiopia. We're actually working with Ghana and Ethiopia to establish a sustainable training program. Now moving on. I'm not sure why. One second. I'm going to stop sharing and start again. I'm not sure what happened. Okay. Okay, now moving on to lessons learned. So the pandemic really increased the challenges faced by statistical offices to deliver the SDGs. For example, it upset all the censuses and surveys in most countries. At the same time, it increased the demand of data to study the impact of the pandemic. So at GIST, we learned the following. There is a lot of interest in building statistical capacity, but more resources are needed to make it a priority. Having an SDG-focused statistics hub with online quality courses freely available is a great start, but we need to increase the uptake by NSOs. More participants, including women, benefit when learning is available online. However, pivoting to teaching remotely is not trivial if you want to be effective. You need new pedagogical skills, new kinds of formats, new kinds of materials, exercises, etc. required. And of course, as some people have mentioned, infrastructure issues can impact the effectiveness of remote learning. Another lesson learned is there is substantial training available. I see your hand. Thank you, Charmaine. There is substantial training available on various statistical topics, but a lack of systematic training to build staff capacity. Setting up in-house training enables staff capacity through systematization and continuity. Also, management and other soft skill capacity trainings are really in short supply. We also need more courses in other languages apart from English. We need other major languages. International partners should provide training that is prioritized by countries and regions. This is why I say it should be demand-driven. And we need to have ways to evaluate the long-term effectiveness on trainings. Not all skills can be transferred through online training, as many of my previous presentations, mentioned. So looking into the future, we're going to add more quality courses. We want to provide more blended learning options. We want to promote systematic capacity strengthening by mapping skills of staff to areas of need. We want it to be demand-driven. We want to help build in-house training for sustainability. We want to improve statistical literacy in civil society to increase data use. We want to develop courses to address gaps in statistics to deliver the SDGs. And we want to make courses available in multiple languages. And with that, I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mathilde. Mitali.
Mitali, yes.
Right. Okay, so thank you to all our presenters. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, we had quite a rich diet of information for us this afternoon. First of all, we had Katerina, who, among many other things, because otherwise I'd be presenting again, really challenged us, putting in focus that critical issues to pay attention to are ethical and pedagogical, and matters of socio-emotional learning and the arts, and challenges with interculturalism and human rights and peace quite a bit, and challenged us as to how it is that digitalization is going to assist us in addressing those issues. Sheila helped us to look a little bit at those kinds of economic and environmental matters that are creating a shift, and the work of the technology in helping us to navigate all of those, and the new kinds of learning and approaches to learning, such as micro-credentialing, that has emerged as a result of and makes it even more, because of the dynamism of the context, makes learning so much more important and need to be accessed easier than traditionally. And then Tekla shared with us a very, very useful experience that we can learn from, and how we can utilize technology beyond learning in the workplace. And that's excellent. And I really appreciated that. And then Mitali, this is how I summarize what you shared with us. It really is about helping us to develop a capacity building in terms of statistics, which for me is crucial for part of our monitoring systems towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So ladies and gentlemen, you have heard a lot. And I want to thank our presenters, but I also want to now ask you to share with us some of your questions. We have 15 minutes within which to do that. And so I was looking to see if I see any questions myself. And so I wanted to see if we have any of those. But in the meantime, while we look to see if we see any of those kinds of questions emerging, I want to put a question to all of the presenters. It's a more global question, and that is really is around what are the most important lessons learned from the education in the pandemic, and another way to put that is, what have we learned from the disruption that we can take forward as we respond to other disruptions using the technology. So we can get, anyone can jump in. I won't call who will get started, so anyone can take it first. What have you been learning from your experiences, whether with the Learning Lab, the Statistical Institute? Katerina, what have you been learning? Those kinds of things. What are the takeaways?
I think Katrina has her hand up.
I'm not seeing that. Okay, good. Go ahead, Katerina.
Yes. Sherman, if you would allow me, I first would go back to one of the questions that was asked in the chat box. We had question and answer box and chat box. I've tried to answer some of them in written, but there was one that I would really like to share with all participants in that way. It was a question about values and the social emotional learning and ethical issues. Like, they are usually the basis for them is usually in the family. So how can we then, through education, make people better citizens? So I'm not quoting, but I think that was the meaning of the question. And this is really a question that preoccupies all of us very much. And I think this is the most important question of our time, because we see how the world looks like, all the wars and the climate change and destruction and so on. So how can we be better citizens if it's based in the family and we missed it? Well, I'm a big believer in adult education, adult learning and education. And I'm saying that based on two things. First one is the research. basically I'm a researcher, and I know that many researchers did prove that education can really help to change the mindset of the people. But another reason that brings me to this optimistic view is my own teaching experience. I'm working quite a lot with adult people. Many of the trainings, soft skills were mentioned here, for example, but also peace education, intercultural education, and so on. And based on that, I allow myself to say, it is possible. And we can change the mindset of the people, or improve or highlight some things towards being a better citizen, meaning critically reflecting, being engaged, more active, being engaged for the global issues. We have people here that are coming from different countries, and a few countries were mentioned, for example, Afghanistan and so on, and we know it means different things. And we need to be really global citizens and be aware of all these global issues and global power architecture. So I deeply believe it's possible, but it's not easy. And we did mention, and this is, well, if you allow me to say, take away from this session, I mean, if we put the messages from all of us, all the speakers, and also contributions in the chat, it is possible, but we really need an integral and holistic approach. We need this cognitive component. We need information. We need data collection. So you cannot just have an attitude or emotion, or, you know, ready to engage, but you don't know really what for and why. So critical thinking that is based on good cognitive approach, data, reliable statistics, evidences from the researchers and so on. This is the starting point. And then we move to social, emotional, embodied. We move to all the possibilities that digitalization is offering to us. And in this holistic approach, I think there is a lot of things we can change and improve. It does require a lot of energy. It does require innovative way of thinking. It was, for example, mentioned the art-based education, which does not exclude digitalization, I have to say, but we need really to think in an innovative way. So being it art-based, being human touch, being it based on the computer games. So the combination of all these things and the combination of different aspects, which means holistic, integral approach, is something that can help us also to, well, help people to be more engaged, be better citizens, be critical thinkers, improving themselves, self-development, but also development of their communities and of their societies. And COVID-19 offered some of the lessons learned, but I will give the floor to Mitali, and I'm sure she will continue with that.
Okay, over to you, Mitali.
So I just wanted to say that, you know, when the pandemic struck and we all moved online, there were a lot of people who were saying that this is so great. This makes training very accessible to more people. Like you can see, all our conferences now are much better attended than they were in the past, because nobody has to go to New York or Sweden to attend this conference. So yes, in some respects, the access is better. But to be able to simulate real life learning is much more difficult. And I just wanted to share with you, like we have one active shooters training at the US Census Bureau, all government agencies do, that what do you do if there is a shooter in your building, right? And so if there is, so they tried to make it like a video game. And the exercise was, okay, so the shooter is here, how do you move from point A to point B? And you have to do it within a particular amount of time. You can do it because you're not panicking. Nobody's actually shooting you, right? So the whole experience is entirely different from real life experience. So I am absolutely with the people who are saying it's not a panacea, you know, it's not the solution. We have to figure out what is real life, how can we need to partner with digitalization, but real life experience cannot be substituted. And so I don't see a future where there's only online training, definitely. However good our pedagogical skills get, you know, to convey meaning. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Tekla?
Thank you so much, Charmaine. I just want to add on what Mitali said, and it's so much applicable to us as well. When the pandemic struck, the biggest issues that we had was access to the internet. So participants that we wanted to include in our trainings did not always have access, or there were data issues and others. Also, the attendance in the beginning, like I mentioned previously, it was so low. It only increased over time when people got used to the new way of doing. And then, I totally agree with Mitali and all the others that there is really no one size fits all, and that face-to-face will not phase out very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila.
Thank you. I wanted to, a lot has been said already, very, very pertinent points, but I think where we are heading towards learning from COVID, but not only COVID, but all the other disruptions I mentioned, the fourth industrial, which was already there, the learning poverty happening, a new normal for learning is emerging. And I think it's going to be shaped by 4 dichotomies. Many of them we have picked up from COVID. One, we're going to be moving away from generating learning products to moving to sort of focusing on the learning journeys, with the learner at the center of it. The other thing is we're going to move away from sort of isolation and loneliness of self-paced work or too much socializing in person, to rather than focus exclusively on in-person or virtual, the new normal is about finding a balance between social and human, a balance between isolation and loneliness and interaction with others. And also we move away from more controlled learning environments to sort of flexible and more uncontrolled, because learning is not just cognitive, it's social, interpersonal, emotional, and the learner fully needs to be present in those aspects. And while the pandemic has forced us to become, most of us to become remote, we now have to think very carefully about what in-person is good for and leverage that and balance that with the remote learning. And finally, we're moving away from pure content delivery to learning in applied context, which is really where we see the best results. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all your comments. I think I have a question for Katerina. You see that they reposted the question for you so that you would know. But Mitali, you could tell us a little bit more about the ways in which international partners can help to build capacity.
Yes. So, international partners, at least in the area of statistics and statistical training, it is often the case, at least in low and middle income countries, that everybody's like the FAO will go in, the ILO, US, will go in and provide training, or even the UN, on things that they think are important for these countries. And these countries will not say no because, they don't get access to training. And so often countries accept all training. But these are 3-day trainings, 4-day trainings, and they do not necessarily build their capacity to deliver what they need to deliver, right? So that is one. The other is this duplication of effort, and we often don't hear about it. So I would not know that some other organization has already gone and done a data visualization workshop, right? So that's another thing that needs to be addressed. And that's why we talk about, right now, a lot of the international organizations who are going in are doing like supply-driven training. And we need to really have the national statistical offices have control over what is required so that there is no duplication of effort, and able to tell international partners, these are the gaps. We keep getting people coming and giving us training on this subject, but nobody's coming and giving us training on managing a census or managing a survey. We get training on mapping, we get training on data processing or analyzing, but we don't get, some soft skills, how best to communicate, how best to negotiate. All these countries need those skills, especially because they're often negotiating with very powerful donor groups, right? So don't we want them to build the skill to be able to negotiate so that the terms of agreement are advantageous to them? And that's why I was thinking that international and regional partners need to do a better job of listening to what the real needs are and responding to that.
Okay, thank you so much. And I have another question here, which says, how statistical skills can be integrated more to civil society members or NGOs, academics, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? So it's not just talking about it generally, but more specifically, how can civil society use statistics to? Any comments on that from anybody? In addition to what Mitali just said.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing to that. At the US, in the US, we have a whole statistics in schools program. So we want to say that it starts in school. You start educating people, and it's like geography. So whatever is the subject, there is data that's relevant to it. So you start getting them used to data, using data on the daily basis. What does it mean? The temperature, the weather, the climate, so these all are statistical. So that's all I wanted to say. We have courses for children and courses for media.
All right, thank you. I want to change for maybe about the last question, give more time. And that is there was a question about the fact that there is a gap between what happens in academia in responding to some of those issues you raised, Sheila. And the question was asking, what do you see that can be done to bring corporate and academia closer together in terms of responding to the digitalization of work and workspaces? I think that's what the question would be targeting.
I mean, I can go first. I think, again, rather than just focus on theoretical four-year degrees, the practical issues have to be brought in much sooner, working with corporates who can provide guidance on what are the 21st century skills, what are the skills that are changing, where do we need focus, working with corporates in that regard, but also working with corporates for internships, for bringing in the work experience. And rather than just have four-year degrees, we should have more integrated degrees that integrate learning with work. And again, there was this question I mentioned about a panel where I participated. You don't even know what the jobs that are coming up. So, for example, if a young man or woman told their mother 10 years ago, I want to be an app developer, or I want to make graphics for smart cars, or I want to be a blogger, the mother would be looking at them astounded. But today we have 10 million app developers, similarly bloggers, and so on. So how do we promote such skills? And I think this is where teaching learners as part of degree programs, as part of specializations, how to learn and how to be a quick learner. Because in today's world, I'm told Silicon Valley and others are not looking at your technical skills in Java or PHP or whatever it is. They're looking at your agility to learn, and they're looking at your soft skills, creativity, collaboration, mature decision-making, and so on. So that would be a few responses.
Okay, so thank you so much, Sheila. We're going to have to leave it there. Katerina, you have 30 seconds to give your comment.
As a matter of fact, I wanted to ask if we have 1 hour, 30 minutes or around 45. So in order to say if I will use 40 seconds or more, let me just...
Is it at 1.5 or 1:45? It would be good, so we can move forward some more.
Let's first get the answer to this question.
So there are some other questions.
Yeah. Okay, so
So you can confirm that. Let me see.
Okay. Oh, 1:45. So it means I can use more than 40
All
seconds.
right, go ahead.
Okay, thanks so much. And now I will use the opportunity to go back to the your first and I would say common question for this session, the takeaways for from the COVID-19. And I will use a few words that were mentioned here. So what keywords, what are the lessons learned and what should we use? So there was mentioning of soft skills and now with this new occupation, new profession and so on. I think one of the most important lessons is what we should teach is not teach and learn, are not the reductive skills limited to the certain jobs, certain occupations and so on, and especially not donors driven. There was also discussion in the chat by about who is driving the agenda. So soft transversal broader skills, including like critical thinking and the other that were mentioned. This is something that will help people to manage the new challenges. What I'm very much against is the type of education that should be reactive, helping people only to be resilient and to mild the consequences of the current crisis, and then sit down and wait for the next crisis. This will not work, obviously. So we need a kind of education that will develop broader competencies and deeper knowledge, and then develop this kind of transferable competencies and soft competencies, and those who will help to manage a new situation. And this is a kind of transformative education that we are talking about, not only reactive or adaptive or corrective. Otherwise, we will go from one crisis to another. So just, chasing technological development and trying to cope with the crisis as good as we can. And then another issue that was mentioned, and again, I'm referring to some of the discussions in the chat about this international development and the global issues. And what was mentioned about the trainings, for example, like the trainings that are offered but are not demand-driven, but simply offered by international partners. So International Council for Adult Education is very much involved in these global networks and global issues. And I consider this question of how the agenda of learning, education, and training is developed a crucial one. That should really come from the country, from the learner groups, from the target groups. That should really match the needs of the people, individuals, of the concrete countries, of the communities. Yeah. Otherwise, we are wasting the time and the resources. So this is part of this rethinking global architecture of power, which reflects very much on education. Of course, it has social, political, economic aspects, but I believe education is really a big part of this, and education can help change this agenda and can empower people to be able to create their own agenda, being it on individual level, community level, national level, and so on, and be active participants in these international processes. Not just, developing countries, they're receiving some support and aid and so on, and the others are deciding what kind of learning, what kind of training, what kind of skills. Yeah. So this is what brought us, that led us to this moment of crisis. And the COVID-19, and this is the third point that I would like to mention, COVID-19 exposed the global inequalities and some structural problems. And as a consequence, it was really for some countries, well, there were some consequences, but not like life-threatening. And for the other countries, they were serious economic catastrophe. So to quote Daniel Barr, we are all sitting, we are in the same storm, but we are not sitting in the same boats. Mm-hmm. And the boats are very, very different. And the consequences for single target groups, so single group of people and countries are different. Let's say girls and women, so they were much more affected by economic, social, political consequences of COVID. Countries without stable democratic processes, so the authoritarian regimes, so run over the human rights, minority rights, and so on. And of course, some countries were hit much more than the others. So the education should offer the question, why is it happening? And what should we do in the future to prevent the next crisis that will happen, and we will again let's help people to solve the current problems and to deal with the daily problems of daily life and work, which is of course very important. But if we want to do more education, and I believe we all agree here that we do want to do more, then this kind of more transformative, more open-minded, more innovative education, teaching and learning and training is needed.
Thank you, Katerina. And you have pushed the discussion back at the more global socio-political level. And so one of the questions I would want to ask other panelists to respond to is how much is being done on to address the matter of global inequality, because it would suggest that here we are trying to look at digitalization, but at the root of that, more fundamental are, as you say, in the architecture of the, I had my own word, but I will use power. So that kind of architecture, if the architecture of power remains, then we will always be going back and forth around these kinds of issues. So any feedback on what do we see happening to shift the worldview and the thinking that currently drives the architecture of power, that creates the gap? And someone in the chat spoke about the situation with girls in Afghanistan. I don't know if you noted that and wanted some comments on that. Sheila? I don't know if you had your hand before or just now, but I see your hand up. If not, anyone else who wants to respond to that. How do we see that shift taking place that will make what we are about more possible?
I think that's a really good question on how do we address inequality, and is this technology only for some more than others, right? Mm-hmm. I think, frankly, there is no black and white answer, because at one level, I am seeing many more participants from Africa in the conferences. I am seeing many more than I used to in the past because of online participation, right? I am seeing people from Pakistan, from, that I would not see in person. But yes, I mean, we've all gone through the pandemic, and infrastructure problems are much more in the low-income countries than they were in the developed countries. So, and access to things is much more in the developed world. But I do think that it's not a black and white answer. I think there are advantages to it, and we have to figure out maybe infrastructure needs to become an issue that we need to put resources towards, Maybe that's the basic, like if you have infrastructure where people can get world knowledge, that is the basic access. Because even when I'm in these countries, some people in these countries have better access than others, right? Mm-hmm. So it's always the elites in every country are better off mm-hmm. than the majority. So I do think that digital, having as much knowledge in our fingertips as we have now should not be discounted. I have mm-hmm. seen people learning from YouTube videos, from MOOCs in these countries, and they all learn. So, and those of us who have been on Instagram, we see they teach any kind of thing, how to fix a toilet to how to put on makeup, right? And people are responding to those things. They are learning in 3 minutes, 5 minutes. And I agree with Sheila that we need to think differently about the learning ecosystem. We are all going to have to continuously learn, and not as university degrees. University degrees need to adapt to our kind of, learning for application. Okay, I'll stop there and let other people have an opportunity.
Okay, so is there another response?
Charmaine, there is we have in the chat box a colleague from Afghanistan, Fatima.
Mm-hmm. I saw that.
And I feel we should really address this issue. I think this is one of the most pressing issue the world is facing today, the situation, mm-hmm. especially situation on women and girls. Mm-hmm. And I think we failed so much. And somehow, turning the blind eye and not dealing with it anymore. But there are some lessons learned. I don't know, of course, about the action that could be done. I'm not a policymaker, don't have this kind of a power, but I think one of the important messages is we did not invest there in people, in the quality of life of a people, in the citizenship, in the NGOs, militarization, and then in the wrong way. So weapon and soldiers and so on, like this will solve all the problems. And that's what we tend to believe. And of course, there are now plenty of analyses. Some of them were there earlier, but they were not read by the people. Some of them arrive now telling exactly that. We invested, and there are even figures like billions of dollars in the weapon and training of soldiers. But the local people, there was not much for them, maybe in Kabul, in capital and so on, but not on the countryside. So the life of people really did not improve. And that's, so we were turning a blind eye. We were not really looking into the long-term quality results and the power of education. It was very, very limited. And as I said, mostly military training and these kind of things. So there are other important lessons, but I am thankful to Fatima that she's raising this issue and she's reminding us that Afghanistan is still there. Afghan girls and women are still there suffering. And we cannot simply say, oh, we failed and that's it. So somehow I feel that also this session might raise this issue and might, Mital is asking me in Kabul. No, I was there. So I was teaching in Afghanistan, I was teaching in Kabul and I have friends there. But that's of course not the only reason. As a citizen of the world, I feel that this is an issue that cannot be forgotten, must not be forgotten.
I was not asking you, I was asking Fatima, who was,
oh, sorry.
She says she's in Afghanistan. So I just wanted to know.
I understood.
He's connecting from Kabul.
She's answering, yes, she's answering from Kabul. So we see how also this infrastructure and digital access is enabling her at least to be in touch with us and to share her message with us. So this is something that really, when it comes to technology, this is the thing that I really appreciate very much. People that are in deprived situation. Oh, we have Mariam also from Kabul.
So Katerina, if I might jump in here to say, based on what you're sharing and based on the question, it is appropriate for us to engage with that because one of the questions we had identified for ourselves is to look at the barriers and how might we think through those barriers. And as you said, we're not politicians and such, but we can at least articulate this as a barrier. And that one of the things that's striking me as you all share is even as we are looking at digitalization, this is an additional thing, but the original problems remain. Regional, and so this has just added to it because now you have added to the fact that everybody is talking about access online and still there are many millions who cannot access online. While we were here, I think, don't remember who was presenting, and then it kept going in and out and I was getting nervous and I'm saying the world over, even in developed countries, areas have trouble with access. And so those things go beyond education. And so what it brings out for me is as we discuss that we have to be interested in all other sectors of society and what is happening there. And particular now is in all kinds of infrastructure within our countries to be able to facilitate access. Couldn't this be why, as one of the presenters said, we will never have total online because there are all these gaps and these barriers that are there before us. So we said we wanted to explore some of those barriers and to think through some of the kinds of things that we would want to look at. We wanted to look at some of the limitations and the risks of digital technology. And I think Katerina in her presentation spoke to some of that, some of those kinds of limitations. And I think also coming out of Sheila's presentation, we heard some of those coming out. And so I believe I'm checking to show that we have really addressed the questions that we posed for ourselves. We could have looked a little more at how we improve national adult training, but we did look at some of those. I think it was Mitali who spoke about the need to ensure that we don't just carry the training, and the whole matter of training with the people and training emerging from what the needs of the people rather than just importing it in, that those things are critical and important. And so earlier, I wanted to wrap us, and that would have been 15 minutes early, but I think we are now at the right time, and I have no interest in going over time. And so we have a minute in which I will just want to say thank you to all my panelists for engaging us and engaging the audience that joined us today. So thank you to Katerina from the International Council for Adult Education. Thank you to Sheila from the World Bank. Thank you to Tekla from the Office of the Prime Minister in Namibia. And thank you to Mitali, the chair of the Global Network of Institutions for Statistical Training. And by my watch, it is now 2:45. So I am Charmaine Barrett, and it has been my pleasure
I need my phone
to host you today and to give opportunity for them to get their phone. So
thank you, Charmaine. Good job.
So thank you so much.
Wonderful moderation. Thank you, Charmaine.
Of the day.
Well done.
You're most welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Was a pleasure.
Was a pleasure too.
Pleasure here too.
Great presentations, everyone.
And great moderator.
Thank you.
Good moderator, yeah.
Thank you so much, and goodbye.